The silence in the old house was different now. It was no longer an empty, echoing thing, but a comfortable, chosen quiet. Arthur Higgins sat in his worn armchair, the one that had conformed to his father's shape before his own, and watched dust motes dance in a shaft of late afternoon sun. They were just dust, not symbols of his decay. The peeling paint on the window frame was just paint, not a testament to his failure. The world had not changed, but his place within it had been fundamentally, terrifyingly altered. The frantic, giddy euphoria of the first day had long since evaporated, replaced by a profound and solemn understanding. The book. Now hidden not under a loose floorboard but within a fireproof lockbox he'd bought with a sliver of his newfound wealth, was not a toy. It was a nuclear reactor in a leather-bound casing, the line of silvery Tex-Fidel reserve depletion. 60% was seared into his memory, a constant, chilling reminder of the balance sheet upon which his life was now written. He felt the cost, too, not as an illness, but as a subtle dimming. He tired morosely. A flight of stairs that once was nothing now left him slightly winded. The world seemed a fraction less sharp, the colors a shade less vibrant, as if someone had turned down the saturation on his very existence. He had traded the vibrant, uncertain potential of decades for the secure, diminished reality of now. He was, for all intents and purposes, a young man in an aging body, his biological clock forcibly advanced by his own desperate hand. The aftermath of the Omniarch incident had been a surreal, silent storm. For a week, the city was consumed by the news. The catastrophic structural failure of one of its most iconic towers was the lead story everywhere. Experts debated flawed designs and substandard materials. Conspiracy theorists whispered about everything from terrorist attacks to alien weaponry. The physical manifestation of Elias Black's fortune had, in its collapse, been rendered back into an abstract chaos, a blizzard of pulverized concrete, shredded paper, and twisted metal. Recovery crews found Black's body, but the true cause of his death was buried under millions of tons of his own liquefied assets. Arthur followed the news with a detached, numb horror, half expecting a team of men in black to kick his door down at any moment. But they never came. He was a ghost, Elias Black's vast network had apparently collapsed with him, and the anomaly of Arthur Higgins was lost in the room. He kept his job at the archive. It was his anchor, his tether to the man he used to be. The familiar smell of old paper and dust was a comfort. The tedious, meticulous work of cataloging and preserving the past was a meditation. His colleagues noticed the deeper calm that had settled over him, the new lines around his eyes that spoke of some unknown hardship, but they attributed it to his recent inheritance and the pressures of sudden, modest wealth. He'd told them a vague story about a reclusive great-aunt, and they'd accepted it. People see what they expect to see. He used the $1 million with a frugality born of a lifetime of scarcity. He paid off the house, a transaction that filled him with a deep, quiet satisfaction that no wish could ever replicate. He bought a sensible, reliable car. He had the roof properly repaired and the plumbing updated. He did not buy a yacht. He did not travel the world. He did not acquire a new wardrobe of designer labels. The money was a tool for stability, not for a spectacle. The real power, the terrifying power, remained locked in the box, and he had no intention of ever accessing it for personal gain again. But the book was still there, a siren song in the back of his mind. It was a cure for futility, a scalpel for the world's small, nagging injustices. And try as he might to resist, he found himself drawn to it, not for himself, but for others. The compulsion started small, a way to test the limits of his remaining vital reserve on acts that felt. Pure. One Tuesday, a young woman, a university student, came into the archive, her face etched with a despair he recognized. She was on the verge of tears, explaining to his colleague that her thesis depended on a specific set of letters between two obscure early 20th century poets, letters that were supposedly in their collection but had been misfiled or lost decades ago. A months-long search had yielded nothing. Her deadline was in a week. Her academic future hung in the balance. Arthur felt a familiar prickling on the back of his neck. This was a tangible problem, a physical thing, lost. This was within the book's purview. That evening, he went up to the attic, the familiar dread and excitement coiling in his stomach. He opened the lockbox. The blank book felt heavier, warmer. He took a deep breath, feeling the slight, constant ache of his depleted vitality. He picked up a pen he'd upgraded from the pencil stub and wrote. Carefully, precisely. I wish for the lost correspondence between poets Alistair Finch and Evelyn Gray, dated between 1912 and 1914, to be found intact and legible in Box 17, Folder 3 of the Municipal Archives Finch collection. He closed the book. The fatigue that washed over him was noticeable, a wave of heaviness that made his limbs feel like lead. But it was manageable, a gentle tug compared to the catastrophic drain of the Black Wish. He waited a minute, then opened the book again. The golden script gleamed back at him. Wish acknowledged. Manifested. Documents relocated. Below it, in silvery ink. Energy expenditure minor. Vital reserve depletion, 0.5%. 0.5%. For a young woman's future, it felt worth it. The next day, he stumbled upon the letters while doing a routine inventory of Box 17. The girl's cry of joy, the tears she shed as she hugged the brittle papers to her chest, was a feeling more potent than any $1,000,000 balance. He had not controlled her mind or guaranteed her success. He had simply removed an obstacle. He had leveled a playing field. Hust alidle. This became his new, secret purpose. He became a gardener of small miracles. He would read the local paper, not the financial section, but the human interest stories. A family whose heirloom wedding rings were stolen. A local soup kitchen with a broken industrial stove they couldn't afford to replace. A community garden suffering from a mysterious blight. He would target his wishes with surgical precision, always for the restoration of what was lost or broken, never for the creation of something new from nothing. He found that the energy cost was proportional to the complexity and the distance the manifestation had to travel. Making a lost ring appear in its original jewelry box was a minor drain. Repairing the complex machinery of a commercial stove was a bit more, perhaps 1%. Curing the blight in the garden, which involved altering the biology of hundreds of plants, cost him 2%. He watched the silvery numbers add up in the book, a grim counter ticking down his remaining life. 59.5%. 58.5%. 56.5%. He was spending his life, day by day, wish by wish, and he found, to his own astonishment, that he was at peace with it. The tiredness was a constant companion, but so was a profound sense of contentment he had never known. He was no longer Arthur the Poor, or Arthur the Anomaly. He was Arthur the Steward, the keeper of the flame. This quiet, anonymous philanthropy did not go entirely unnoticed. In a world of chaos and misfortune, the string of small, localized good fortunes in Arthur's neighborhood began to form a pattern, but only to AI trained to see such things. Dr. Ari Stone was such an eye, a professor of statistical anthropology at the local university. He was a man obsessed with patterns, with the hidden rhythms beneath the surface of reality. He had been the one consulted on the Omniarch collapse, running complex algorithms to determine the probability of such a specific, catastrophic failure. His models had come back strange. The failure wasn't just improbable, it was, according to every known variable, impossible. It was an outlier that broke his scales. Puzzled, he began feeding other data into his model's local news reports of strange happenings, community board posts about minor miracles, and a pattern emerged. A geographic locus, a epicenter of statistical impossibility, and at the center of that epicenter was a single, unremarkable zip code. Digging deeper, cross-referencing property records with the few eyewitness accounts of the Omniarch day, a security guard who mentioned a nervous, sandy-haired man being escorted upstairs, a name began to surface. Again and again, a silent, recurring note in the symphony of chaos. Arthur Higgins. Thorne was not a man like Elias Black. He was not driven by avarice or a lust for power. He was driven by an insatiable, pure curiosity. The why of the universe was his religion, and Arthur Higgins was a crack in the facade of reality, a place where the laws of physics had apparently taken a coffee break. He had to understand. He found Arthur not at his house, but at the archive. He posed as a researcher looking into early urban planning, a cover that allowed him to spend hours in the reading room, observing his subject. Arthur felt the man's gaze. It was different from the predatory stare of Black's men. This was a gaze of intense, focused study. It was the feeling of being a rare insect pinned to a board. He grew nervous, his hand shaking slightly as he fetched a requested microfilm for the professor. The familiar panic began to rise. They know. He knows. After the archive closed, Arthur hurried home, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm. He was so focused on the potential threat behind him that he didn't notice the car parked discreetly down the street from his house, or the man sitting inside, not with menace, but with a notebook and a powerful sense of intrigue. Days passed. Thorne did not approach. He observed. He noted the small things. The impossibly pristine condition of Arthur's lawn and a street of struggling ones. The way a local news story about a donated state-of-the-art new stove for the soup kitchen coincided with Arthur taking a sick day. He was building a case, not for a prosecution, but for a hypothesis. The confrontation, when it came, was nothing like the one with Black. Arthur was watering his front flowers a wish he had not made. He was learning to garden the old-fashioned way when Eris Thorne simply walked up his path. "Mr. Higgins," Thorne said, his voice calm, academic. "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I was wondering if I might ask you a few questions about local statistical anomalies." Arthur froze, the watering can trembling in his hand. The blood drained from his face. This was it. The end. Thorne saw the terror in his eyes and raised a placating hand. "I am not with any authority. I am not a threat. I am merely a scholar. And I believe you may be the most interesting man I have ever encountered." He didn't force his way in. He didn't make demands. He stood on the porch and explained, in precise, clinical terms, about his models, about the Omniarch outlier, about the epicenter of impossibility that was Arthur's life. He spoke not of magic, but of quantum probability, of localized reality distortion fields. He was trying to fit Arthur into a scientific framework, and his failure to do so was, to him, the most beautiful thing in the world. Defeated, exhausted by the constant fear, Arthur did something he never thought he would do. He invited the man in. They sat in Arthur's modest living room. For a long time, Arthur said nothing. Thorne waited, his curiosity a patient, palpable force. "You'll think I'm mad," Arthur finally said, his voice a dry whisper. "Mr. Higgins," Thorne replied, "the data suggests that reality itself is mad in your vicinity. I am open to any explanation." And so, Arthur told him. He told him about the trunk, the book, the first wish, the rose, the rules. He spoke of the cost, the vital reserve, and he saw the scientist's eyes light up with a terrifying, brilliant fire. When he got to Elias Black, Thorne leaned forward, his breath caught. When Arthur revealed the final cost, the 60% Thorne sat back, a look of profound, almost religious awe on his face. "A metabolic cost," Thorne whispered, more to himself than to Arthur. "A direct conversion of biological life into niche. It's beautiful." He looked at Arthur, not as a specimen, but as a fellow explorer. "You have been given a terrible and wonderful gift, Mr. Higgins. A responsibility. You are not a god. You are a gardener. You are pruning the branches of reality and paying for each cut with your own flesh." It was the first time anyone had understood, truly understood. Thorne became an unlikely confidant. He offered no desire to use the book himself. The mere knowledge of its existence was his prize. He helped Arthur refine his understanding of the cost, creating a ledger to track the depletion. He theorized that the costs might not be purely linear, that the book might draw less energy for wishes that created great good, a concept he called karmic efficiency. Arthur didn't fully understand the math, but the idea resonated. Under Thorne's discreet guidance, Arthur's wishes became even more effective. A 1% wish could now reroute a misdirected charitable donation to a shelter that desperately needed it. A 0.5% wish could ensure a crucial medical sample for a sick child in the city hospital wasn't lost in transit. One evening, looking at the ledger, Arthur saw the number. Vital reserve remaining, 41.5%. He had spent 18.5% of his life, on top of the initial 60%, in a matter of months. The tiredness was deep now, a constant hum in the background of his existence. He moved slower. His hands sometimes ached. He was, by all appearances, a man in his late 60s, though the calendar insisted he was only 47. Thorne looked at him with concern. "Arthur, you must stop. You are spending your life at an unsustainable rate." "But there's so much more to do," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "That children's hospital wing. The one that needs the new ventilator. That is not your responsibility alone," Thorne insisted, his academic calm breaking for the first time. "The book does not make you a savior. It makes you a man with a limited resource. You must choose." Arthur knew he was right, but he also knew the feeling of that little girl hugging her found thesis. He knew the look on the soup kitchen manager's face when the new stove arrived. He was addicted to the good he could do. The end came not with a bang, but with a whisper. It was a small story in the paper. A fire in a low-income apartment building. The single mother and her 2 children had escaped with their lives, but everything was gone. All their photos, their keepsakes, the small, irreplaceable tokens of a life built against the odds. The community was rallying, collecting clothes, furniture, but you can't collect lost memories. Arthur read the article, and he knew this would be his last wish. A big one. He would not just give them new things. He would restore what was lost. He didn't tell Thorne. He went up to the attic alone. The stairs were a mountain now. He opened the lockbox. The book seemed to pulse with a soft, welcoming warmth. He knew the cost would be immense. To reassemble burned photographs from ash, to reconstitute melted toys. It would be an act of creation bordering on resurrection. He picked up the pen. His hand was steady. For the first time, there was no fear, only a quiet, absolute certainty. He wrote, "I wish for the home of Maria and Ben Rodriguez, lost in the fire at 221 Elm Street, to be restored to its state exactly 1 hour before the fire began, with all its contents intact and undamaged, and for it to be so when they returned to the site tomorrow." He closed the book. He didn't need to open it to know the golden script had appeared. The fatigue that hit him was not a wave. It was the entire ocean. It was a pulling away, a great, gentle tide drawing him out from the shores of his own body. He slumped back against a stack of old boxers, the book cradled in his lap. He felt no pain, only an immense, overwhelming peace. He saw it then not with his eyes, but with some deeper sense. The burned-out shell of the apartment, the blackened timbers, beginning to glow with a soft, golden light, the ash swirling, coalescing, forming into pictures, into books, into a child's stuffed bear, the walls knitting themselves back together, the smoke stains retreating like a tide, the smell of fire replaced by the smell of home. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever witnessed. Arthur Higgins closed his eyes. He was still smiling when Eris Thorne found him the next day, after growing worried he hadn't answered his phone. The book was in his lap, open. On the last page was Arthur's final wish, and below it, the golden script. Wish acknowledged. Manifested. Reality restored. And below that, the final, silvery accounting. Energy expenditure. Total. Vital reserve depletion. 100%. Thorne bowed his head, not in grief, but in respect. He took the book from Arthur's lap. It felt inert. Now, cool. Just an old, blank book. The magic, he suspected, had been as much in the man as in the object. Perhaps it had moved on, seeking a new steward.